Hi and welcome to Mark's Motivational Podcast for another Authors Tuesday. Today I'm delighted to be joined by another great author, Mary Kennelly. It's great to be joined by you today, Mary. Thanks a lot for coming on.
Thanks very much for having me. It's lovely to be here.
Great stuff. And you're joining us from sunny Italy at the moment. Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
nice to be away. It's kind of a sign that things are returning to normal again.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's great to have you on. And we might start the podcast off. If you wouldn't mind telling the listeners a little bit about yourself and the great book you've written, Into the Grey. It's around a poetry book. It'd be great if you could just talk around that for a moment.
Yeah, no problem. I suppose Into the Grey is it was kind of a book I hadn't really intended to write. I had two uncles who I was involved in caring for them towards the end of their life. Now there were lots of others in the family who were involved as well, but they both had dementia, and I suppose as I was living with dementia, and it's a hard thing to live with in actual fact, and it really takes its toll, and it's kind of silent, you don't I think everybody that's living with somebody who has dementia, you're very protective of them and you don't want to share too much. And I even felt that when it came to it, when I started writing the book, and I didn't intend to write the book actually. While the two boys, my uncles, were Father John Kennelly and Brendan Kennelly, and while they were sick and I went out to the nursing homes, I didn't write a word for years. And I actually thought that whatever kind of part of me that used to write had probably dried up. And I think it just goes to show what grief is and how powerful it is. And so it was hard, but it was, I think after Brendan died, it was just like a river. The floodgates opened and suddenly everything came out. And even when I was writing it, I thought, oh my God, nobody is going to want to read this book. Nobody is going to want to read this book because it's miserable. But I suppose it's the book that I had to write because that's what came out when I sat down to write. And then, I suppose I have been touched by people who said you understood or you got what it was what it felt like to live with somebody who was. And the way I describe it is just they're in living decline. They're alive, but they're declining and disintegrating, and the person you knew was sort of gone. But I mean, and it sounds terrible, and you can see why I thought nobody would ever want to read this book. But actually, I think when I sat down to write it, it surprised me. I think what I felt about it was that there were things I'd forgotten. There were things that I just remembered then, parts of them that I remembered, and little funny things that happened, just memories, because it's very attritional. It goes on a long time and it's hard.
Oh yeah, and as well, like I have to as well mention for people who are listening as well that you've donated the proceeds to a charity as well, which is great.
Yeah, and thanks for mentioning that. No, it isn't so much great. Yeah, I always felt this book wasn't really my book. That this book was. This book is the boys' book, as I would have called my two uncles the boys, because they became almost like my children in my life, do you know?
Yeah, I know what you're saying, yeah.
And I just feel if they could have said, I'm so profoundly grateful. And, we mentioned COVID earlier on, and when, the two boys had been in two separate nursing homes for, I suppose they were both in nursing homes for somewhere between 5 and 6 years. And when COVID came, like the shutters came down and we all understood why, but knowing that they were going to be treated well, and like we had complete trust that they would be minded and protected affected. And because, you know, I mean, there was 6 or 9 months when we just never saw them except through a window.
God,
They
yeah,
had dementia.
yeah,
You couldn't phone them as such, do you
yeah,
know?
yeah,
And I was so grateful to the 2 nursing homes for what they did. I really was. So it was very
yeah.
easy to donate the money. But I will say, if you don't mind, Oris Vera, which is the nursing home Brendan was in, has got a website, and it's Oris Vera Nursing Home. If you Google that, and you can buy the book if anybody wants to buy the book. It's one of
Right.
the lowest funded nursing homes in Ireland. In actual fact, I didn't even know nursing homes got different amounts, but they do.
Yeah.
And they're an amazing nursing home. I remember, like, even going in, you know, when Brendan was in the first, they had a greyhound. They had a little greyhound, a therapy dog that would come around and you
Yeah.
know, just mind the residents and
Mm,
things like that, and calm
mm,
them down. And
right.
it's an amazing place. So if anybody feels like buying it, or is there a nursing home?
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And how long did it take you to write the book yourself? Did it take you long?
Now, bizarrely, the answer is no. And the reason
Okay.
that that's bizarrely is I was not the most prolific of writers. I mean, my first book came out, it's probably nearly 20 years ago now. Yeah, definitely 20
Right.
years or more. And I'd say it was about 7 years before the next one came out, and then it was however many years before the next one came out. So
Mm,
I was used to kind of writing books. I mean, I suppose I was working. I had a different job, and I wasn't a full-time writer at the time. And
mm,
so I was used to taking a very long time to write. But
mm-hmm.
I would come down every morning, and I was writing every day once it started. And the
Mm.
book took about 3 months
Okay.
to
Wow.
write.
Really
And
good.
then I have
Yeah.
a great editor who it
Mm.
pointed out to me, and I'm very lazy. I like writing. I don't like editing. I don't like fixing. And he
Join the
just,
club.
well, yeah, and
Yeah.
he just explains to me why I'm being lazy. And you
Yeah.
know, he just forces me to be better, if you like. So we worked on that for another couple of months. And I said, look, it's not my first book, and I'm very lucky, you know.
Mm.
I know the people I'm working with now and things like that.
Yeah.
So it was
Yeah.
possible to get the book done. And then it was launched in Writers Week by the Minister for Education, Norma Foley. And
Great.
I
Yeah.
knew Norma because actually I'd been her principal just before she went out to be
Okay.
elected. And but so it was lovely. It was really nice to have Norma there.
Mm.
And I said I had retired because really, after being her boss, she was now my boss, and it was time for me to go. So
Yeah. Yeah, very good. And
so,
I love the message you have in your book as well, you know, because like a lot of families everywhere
mhm.
experience dementia. Like even my granny had it, like she went senile, so I
Yeah.
know exactly where you're coming from. And as well as that, like to look at the funny times as well is kind of very important, and the happy
Mhm.
times you've had together as well can really resonate
Yeah.
with a lot of people. So that's really great.
Yeah, I like, the book is divided into different sections. So there's two tiny sections with one poem each in it. Within the two main sections, one is called John and one is called
Hmm.
Brendan. Because
Yeah.
actually, the funny thing is, even though there were similarities, obviously, they were two different people. And
Hmm.
so dementia, they had two different kinds of dementia in actual fact. And before Father John got dementia, I didn't know that there were all these different kinds of
Mm.
dementia, you
Yeah.
know. Um, and so you go through this journey, and you learn to be a sort of an expert on
Yeah.
your person and your
Mm.
person's version of dementia, and
Yeah.
the relationship they have with dementia. And then you're silent about it because you're trying to protect the person that you love, and you don't want
Hmm.
to expose them. And um, like, I think the beginning of dementia in a lot of ways is really heartbreaking, because
Hmm.
you know, the person themselves just begins to notice something is going wrong.
Yeah.
And they're aware
Mm.
of what's happening for a long time, you know. And that's very hard. And they're embarrassed, and they're trying to hide. And I think families kind of try to hide it as well.
Hmm.
And then you know, you just go, as I say, down this path that's difficult and heartbreaking and exhausting.
Yeah.
And I suppose for me it was, I knew that John and Brendan, I knew who they had been, and the giants of men they had been when they were younger, and I knew they would want to thank the people around them. And should they,
Yeah.
like in the journey, both of them, and I would say that both of them died from dementia. They weren't, and the way I would put it is, they weren't lucky enough to die from anything else. They died from dementia, which is a very slow death. And they were like little babies in the end. They had just completely regressed to very silent, lost little babies.
Yeah.
That was another thing that happened for families with COVID. You couldn't just, like, language had kind of gone for them to a great extent. Song was very useful. We'd go and we'd sing songs for them and they would remember, But
Yeah.
I think touch, the fact that you couldn't reach out and hold somebody's hand anymore because of COVID, it was really difficult at times.
Very
It was
tough.
hard. Yeah.
Very tough. Yeah. I know that, like, I know, it's just, I know exactly what you're saying there. Well done to you for getting the book out there, and I hope it, I hope it's going to do really, really well. I hope you get a lot of sales, and I'm going to share the link as well on the show notes to the nursing home that you can buy. They can buy the book.
Yeah. Because they're saints. And I remember, I don't know if it got sorted out, but I remember there was some kerfuffle over whether the people in the nursing home would get this €1,000 bonus payment. I think at one stage they weren't going to get it. I don't know if they will or not, but I mean, they really deserved it, as do the doctors and the nurses.
Yeah.
I think in Ireland often we say, they shouldn't get it if I'm not getting it. I just think everyone who did that work
Definitely
get it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we might just talk about your story as well. Where did it all begin for you with your writing? It's a lot of poetry you do. It's a lot of poetry, Mary. Yeah.
It is, and I'll tell you, like when you have Brendan Kennelly as your uncle, and my dad is Paddy Kennelly, who's also a writer and a poet. I can tell you that, like, the last thing I wanted to do was write poetry. Why would you even bother going after people like that, But the funny thing is, when I sat down to write, that's what kind of came out. I was working and I had a small family, and poetry is a very creative form of writing. And if you only have 15 minutes, you can write, and you can come back and you can polish it and you can keep it in your head and think about things. So yeah, I don't know is the answer. I don't know why poetry, but and it's like, I call it the minority sport of writing. So it doesn't have big markets or anything. But that's what came out. And I suppose in the beginning I really felt it. I would be honest and say, like, I was so lucky. I'm from Ballylongford, County Kerry originally, and was living in Listowel when the first book came out, and then later in Glyn, where I live now. And I was blessed. I had great friends. Brendan was very kind to me. My dad was very kind to me. They would have read the poems as I was writing them and offered suggestions. John Keane was a great friend of mine, very kind to me. Gabriel Fitzmaurice, the poet, was down there. So I'm not going to be crying boo-hoo. I mean, I came into a fantastic writing community. That North Kerry writing community is amazing, really. And there were, I'd be honest to say there were huge advantages. I already knew so many people. But the flip side of it was, I've been coming in and writing poetry with a second name like Kennelly. There were comparisons made at times where I go, oh, God, can I just be me today, Or sometimes if I went to a poetry reading where they were doing something of Brendan's, and I'd hear a poem that I hadn't remembered. I think, oh Jesus, he's written one. He wrote this before I wrote it. Because he was so prolific. He wrote about everything anyway.
Great stuff. And what's your other books called, Mary? What's the other poetry
The
books called?
first book, and they're unusual. The first book that I did is called Sunny Spells, Scattered Showers, and it was
Okay.
with the artist Rebecca Carl. And I've done that an awful lot. And actually, my next project is going to be with an artist. So the first project was, I suppose that Rebecca, as an artist, had never put anything together. And I
Mm.
hadn't put stuff together as both. So it was really everything. It was everything up to that point in my life. There's a lot of motherhood in there, and there's a lot of, I suppose, life as a. I was in my 30s when the first book came out, and then the second book was with the artist Brenda Fitzmaurice, and that was called From the Stones. And I think in that one, that's an expression we use at home. I'm sure people are familiar with it.
Mm.
If you do something that reminds people of your relations, they'll say, "Oh, well, she didn't lick that from the Stones."
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, and actually, the book was about the influence of my home and the people and the language and the sound of the language.
Mm.
I remember when I was a very young teacher, I was teaching first in Mayo, and I'd say things. And they'd say, "What are you saying, miss?" They were just turns of phrase that I had used, obviously, in Kerry, that did not
Yeah.
translate. And that's when I learned that language is local in actual fact,
Mm.
and it has Ireland's amazing. Like, this small little country has all these different dialects and different
Hmm.
expressions. And so From the Stones is kind of what it was really Brenda and I painting Kerry, if you if you like, and
Very good.
writing
Yeah.
Kerry. Um, and then after that, the next book was, which I know, Catching Bats Takes Patience,
Okay.
and which was a solo collection with Liberties. And Brenda and I had been working. We were down in Skelligs, and it was a fantastic documentary on about it was a tribe in Africa who had the crops had failed, and they all had to work together um, to come up with another food source, and they were trying to catch bats. And there was a great line in it that said, "Catching bats takes patience." And I said, right, if I do actually write another, that's it. That's what I'm going to, because it was about that sort of, I think when I wrote Catching Bats, my father-in-law had died of motor neuron disease, and the kids were getting bigger, and life was getting busier. I was at the time on the road. I was working with special education support service, and I was traveling around the country, and my kids were at home, and had a great husband, but who was minding the kids. But like, so it was about that kind of squeeze that you get in life,
Hmm. Yeah.
That's kind of what the book's about. And the Catching Bats just refer to the fact that we don't get through life without people around us, that we are actually reliant on
Hmm.
the support structures we put in place for ourselves. And after that, the fourth book was Splinters. And Splinters is a very misunderstood book, I think, because when I was in university many years ago, I actually went to Maynooth, and I studied theology and history. And scripture was always my favorite, but not for any religious reasons. It's just such an amazing work of literature, and the sounds, and the different
Yeah.
parts to it. And the idea that you have a volume as old as it is and as varied as it is. And so in Splinters, I decided to try and see if I could retell the gospel story. And because I'd been interested in scripture over the years, I had gone and read both the canonical, what appears in the gospel, but in the Bible, but also all of these little fragments of gospels that have turned up over the years that are and that are really quite challenging and different. And
Mm.
then I suppose I had known a lot about how the Gospels came to be written down, and how they were maybe changed, and you could
Mm.
argue subverted, or the story was added to or edited. And so I to see if I could tell the story in a very immediate kind of an alternative way. And so I told the gospel story more or less from the part of view of the bit players, you know. So it's told from the point of view of Peter's mother-in-law tells her story, or the woman who touched her story, or like Pilate tells his story, and the centurion tells his story. And now it wasn't intended ever to be a religious book. It was I suppose I had done theology. It would be no different from somebody loving The Lord of the Rings or something like that. You know?
Okay. Yeah.
It was an experiment, and about 2/3, which was about 2 years in, and I thought, God, this would be fantastic with artwork. And I went back to Brenda and I said, is there any chance you would do a painting, you know, sparked off by these poems? And she did a painting for each poem, and that took 3 years, and it was an amazing thing for her to do, very generous to actually, it was 3 years of her working life. So the book Splinters took about 5 years to put together. And then my 5th collection is Into the Grave.
Great stuff. Yeah, so they sound great. And if you wouldn't mind sharing the links with me, Mary, and I can put them on the notes for you as well.
I'll tell you the easiest way to get it is just marykennelly.com. I think it's marykennelly.com or marykennelly.ie. I'll send, and that's it, because actually all of the books are on the website and the links are there. And like
the website's the easiest. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And because you're from Kerry as well, like, did you ever make a Gaeilge version of an Irish version of the books? Did you ever?
I didn't. I mean, I love Irish. We spoke Irish when I was young, but I have lost an awful lot of my Irish, really, being honest with you. And it's something that like all of us. And, you know, I think a lot of us are embarrassed to speak Irish because it's a little bit broken now, or we might have the right word here or the right word there. And again, of course, all Kerry people quote Kerry people. But, you know, Micheál and Martha was amazing, because Micheál would say, you know, just put in the word whenever, and if it's right, it's right. And, you know, and I think we need more of that. I think...
Definitely.
You know, that if people felt comfortable making mistakes, they'd be happy to speak it. You know, so sometimes I think people feel there's a sort of a shame culture with not having it. But once we're happy to make mistakes, we'll be happy to speak it. So maybe I'm actually dyslexic. So if you ask my editor, he'd explain to you that I'm bad enough in English, much less Irish.
I'm your brother. I'm the same. I know the feeling, but no.
I was writing something recently, and I couldn't get my head around how, in the name of God, I would put punctuation on it. I just threw my hands up and I said, "I'm just leaving it like that. The editor can fix it after." It's
But that's a great advice for anybody that is writing and they are dyslexic. You know, don't be afraid to just put it down, and the punctuation and all that kind of stuff can be fixed afterwards.
Oh, and again, this goes back, like, I was very lucky. You know, my dad was very good to me, and then I was just very lucky. I met an editor, and it just clicked. It worked, you know. And I had never really understood how an editor would work, but I mean, right from when I started working with my editor is actually is Spanish, even though he's a very English sounding name. He's Dennis Maidia, and he's living in Brussels, but we work electronically. And right from the start, he was very challenging, and he just, you know, why have you got that there? Why didn't you put it over there? And I could see straight away, oh yeah, that would be better. I think that's something actually for, you know, if you were to say to me, what 2 things would I ever say to somebody who wants to write? The first is, if you want to write, actually write. You know, sit down and do it, and develop, if you can, a practice. I wrote very few books over 20 years. I was working at the same time. But my practice was to get up really early in the morning, really early in the morning. And sometimes that would have to be 5 o'clock, or that would have to be 4:30, whatever it was. And you have to develop a practice, because it's like any practice. It's, if you don't sing ever, then no matter how good a singer you are, you're going to be rusty, you know. And the second is, I think, just don't actually worry at all about if it'll be published, if it's publishable, if it's, you know, if it is, people are good, you know, people are good, and surround yourself with other writers if you know, if you can. If you don't, try online. There are different forums online and things like that. And just let publishing be the furthest thing from your mind when you're writing. I know a time comes and you have to think about the publishing, but not when you're writing.
Yeah, that's great advice. Yeah, because I was actually going to ask you about your strategy in writing, so you really explained that very well there. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and now, funny enough, as I say, I'm retired and I write. Well, writing is my job now, and like, and it's in ways it's harder, because when I had a real structure and a time and a 1 hour in the day or half an hour when I could write, you really valued it. Now there's 24 hours in the day. You know, I mean, I can be quite, you know, I go out and do a little bit of weeding or feed the tomatoes or something like that sometimes when I should be writing. But, you know, you still have to have a structure.
Yeah, definitely agree
I
with
do.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. No, that's great. And would you mind? Do you have one of your poems to hand that you could
Nope.
read us, please, Mary? Would be really great for the listeners.
Yeah. Well, if I'm going to read from Into the Grey, I'll have to read two, because I can't read about
Oh
one
yeah,
and
brilliant.
not the
No,
other.
that's great. No, that's great. Thanks
So,
very much.
yeah, well, I said definitely have to read two, because you can't. I couldn't pick one uncle over the other. You see, you have to be very careful. So I'll read this one. I remember when Father John, when I realised that he couldn't live alone anymore, and that he would have to go to the nursing home. And then in the end, it was sort of his choice. It became obvious that he wasn't going to be able to live alone anymore. But when he went into the nursing home first, we were extremely close. You know, he was like another parent to me, really. And I would go in, and I was so sad. I would come out and I would cry, actually, in the car. It was so sad, because what you realize is that's it. The way I used to think of it was the waiting room for the hearse. It was where he was going to be before he died, and it was so concrete. And this little poem that I wrote about kind of around that time, and the way we just did our best. He was scared when he went in first. I was upset when he went in first. The staff were wonderful, but it was such a big thing. And so this is called Cocoon. We would try to make our own cocoon for ourselves, you know. So Cocoon. Being frail, flawed gods, we created frail, flawed worlds. Small and getting smaller steadily, built on fractured snatches of beauty, peopled by old songs and stories and tender touches and shards of memories. It's a prison, perhaps, but there's comfort too. This cocoon we've built is ours alone. It has its worth and wealth and warmth, so long as we steadfastly refuse reality. It's a burden we cannot bear, because we know we won't be leaving here together. You will be forced one way and I another. So that's one of those more serious poems, I suppose. And there are a lot of serious poems in Brendan's section as well, but Brendan was a scamp. He was an absolute rogue, I'll tell you the truth. And I'll read this one just to show that there are.
There's so much heart in it, Mary. There's so much heart
Yeah,
in it. So we love it.
yeah,
Yeah, it's great.
yeah. I loved both of them, and I did. Um, I wasn't a saint, and none of us were, and there were a lot in the family, as I say, helping. But um, I loved both of them, and it was heartbreaking. It was heartbreaking, you know.
Mhm. Yeah.
Anyway, this is a poem about Brendan, just to show that there are lighter moments in it as well.
Yeah.
Brendan had this thing where he absolutely knew that he knew me. Every time I would come, I would get this beautiful smile. And we used to go driving. Brendan just wanted to be out. He wanted to be driving. So even though he was in the nursing home, for a long time, he was out 7 days a week. We would actually take him driving. That's all he wanted to do was drive and keep driving. But he didn't know how he knew me. So sometimes he thought maybe was I his sister or his I don't niece, and if he did, he wouldn't know how I was his niece, or maybe I was just this nice strange lady who came and took him driving. But he knew me, he just didn't know how. And so he would get confused over my name. So one of the things I learned with people with dementia is instead of leaving tests for them, supply them with the information they need. So I'd always greet him by saying, "Hello, Brendan. It's Mary. I'm your niece. I'm here to take you for a drive. We love each
Right.
other very much." And that's how I
Yeah.
would start. And then he had all the information he needed to be comfortable on the drive.
Oh, yeah.
But he came up with his own name for me, in actual fact, because Brendan had frontal lobe dementia, which meant if he could, and it was not his fault, if he could think it, he thought it was okay to say it or to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And it led to a lot of adventures, I can tell you. And so I would spend my time, Brendan would go off and do something completely outrageous or say something completely outrageous. And I would say, "Stop it, stop it." So this poem is called Stop It. And there's one rude word in it. I hope you're okay with that.
No, that's fine.
On the day you told me to fuck off, I told you to stop me. Then you laughed and did something outrageous just to hear me say "stop it" again. Some days you indulged me in thinking that I was perhaps getting through, only to let loose with an almighty cracker and I throw a "stop it" at you. And to show me that I would not win as we played out our little game, you smiled when I came on that visit, and "Stop It" became my new name.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's great, Mary.
And he did. He actually called me "Stop It," I'd say, for about the last 2 years of life. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's great to have them memories as well, Mary, isn't it? Like, if you've got
Absolutely.
that you've written.
Absolutely. Yeah. And
Yeah,
memories are all you have, really, with
definitely.
people out
Yeah.
it's, yeah.
Yeah. No, it's been great having you on the podcast, Mary, and I really enjoyed it. It's been great hearing your poem as well. I'm looking forward to getting a copy of the book myself. So that's great. And you just share your email so people that are listening on Spotify will be able to I can
Yeah.
share for them as well.
That'd be fantastic. Rark Marie, which I know is desperate. Rark, as in view. RAD for donkey. RADHARC NARI @gmail.com.
Brilliant.
The one I use, and
Yeah.
anyone at all is welcome to get in touch. And it's Kennelly is www.marykennelly. I'm pretty sure it's .com, but it might be .ie. It's one or the other, anyway.
Yeah. If one doesn't work, the other one will.
The other one will, yeah. If you Google me, I'll come up. So,
yeah. And what's next for yourself, Mary? What do you have next?
Well, I'm working on a collection. Kind of working on two collections, but I'm definitely working on a project, and it's back to working with artists again. And I'm working with 3 artists this time: Rebecca Carl, Susan Hitching, and Julie Kelligan-Finucane. Very different artists, but we're working on women of a certain age, us women who've hit our 50s and 60s, and I suppose, we don't have, it's possibly true for men as well. Um, I was just kind of surprised when I hit this age that I wasn't just, that I still felt like me, that I don't
Mm.
feel old. I don't feel ready for the coffin just yet. I don't feel those things. And so it's kind of trying to work out,
Mm.
who are we as women? Who do women become if they're not? And I'm using that lovely Celtic triptych of women: the
Right.
maid, the
Mm.
mother, and they use the term the crone, which is kind of like a dried up, shriveled up, and sure, maybe we are dried up, shriveled up old women, but I'm not a maid anymore and I'm not a mother anymore. My kids are all grown. And so, how do we go usefully and gracefully and maybe beautifully? I think we have these great conversations, and what I realize is we spend so much of our lives not accepting ourselves, just are
Mm-hmm.
thinking we have to be better, or thinking we have to be different, or taller, or skinnier, or fatter, or shorter, whatever it is, that waste so much energy just not
Mm-hmm.
being happy and looking to be happy. So that collection, we're hoping to get that out next year. And then at the same time, I'm working on a collection of my own. I think it's going to be called Age and Other Associated Torments at the moment. And it's just about what it feels like to get older.
Yeah, no, they sound brilliant, and I wish you all the success going forward with all you do, Mary. It's been great talking to you on the podcast.
Mark, thanks so much for having me. It's been lovely to be here.
Brilliant. Yeah, so that was great. Thanks a lot, Mary, and thanks everyone for listening to this great podcast, Mary Kennelly, everybody, and stay tuned for our next one. Thanks again, Mary. Thanks for coming on. Take
Mark.
care. Thank you.
Hello everyone, Mark here. Thank you for watching another episode of my Authors Tuesday podcast. I recently published a book of children's stories called The Adventures of Larry Lamppost and Friends. The book began life as bedtime stories I wrote for my own children. If you'd like to purchase my book, follow the link in the description box below. By buying my book, you are also supporting my podcast series for authors, which is giving a voice to writers in Ireland and across the world.